Hey everyone, Rudros here, and it is time for my usual Opus wrap-up. Opus 16 Emissaries of Light is coming to a close, and as always, I am joined by 2018 World Champion, Mr. Alex Hancox, Mr. Cool himself. Alex, how are you, sir?
I've never been better in my life, Travis, mate.
And boy, do I know that to be true. So if anyone has watched any of these before, usually what I will do is I will go over individual cards and I'll kind of talk about them in the terms of hits and misses. What cards lived up to our expectations, which ones fell short, etc. I'm going to do it a little different this time since we actually had competitive events return with all the ReRaise events. So we'll really be looking at what decks were relevant in the meta and in particular what cards from Opus 16 kind of help these decks succeed. So still the same idea, just a little different since we'll be talking about the competitive scene. So Alex, let's go ahead and I'll cross the seas over to you. We'll start with the London ReRaise event. So this happened back in May. It was the same day actually as the Florida event. Now yours was a little different because you guys did 2-deck format and you had 8 rounds of Swiss. And so you had 2 decks, and like the first 4 rounds you had to use 1 deck, and then the second rounds you had to use the other deck, and then the top cut you had to use 2. I would have loved to have seen how some of the American results would have shaken out differently if we had 2 decks as well, but obviously we didn't have that. Looking over the list, I see definitely quite a bit of Avalanche, which is really interesting. That was still very prominent at the start of the Opus. I know it fell off over here towards the end of the Opus. Definitely Sky Pirates still up there, took the victory. Some loop decks, that mono water list that came up. So you were there in person. You know, we got to hear you talk about it live on stream. Go ahead and start giving me some of your thoughts on your ReRaise and however you want to start that.
Yeah, so this was like the first event Europe had back since COVID, really, first big event. I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. I thought Avalanche would be a prevalent deck, but especially because a couple of members of my local scene were on it and had been doing well and saw no reason kind of not to play it because it was just performing so well and so consistently. And then we had this mono water deck kind of by chance crop out from Japan, and that had Mashery in it and the new Titus, Volker making a comeback, and that was really interesting to see that deck because normally decks don't catch on as quickly, I feel like, in other parts of the world. Like Japan has much more kind of fluid meta. It's a lot more condensed. The players are a lot more kind of, I guess, active, talking about things together. So you see different decks every week. If there's a season of Masters or whatever, there's a new meta deck every week popping up. So seeing Mono Water here was really interesting, and it did perform pretty well. I wasn't surprised at all to see Avalanche take the win. I long predicted the winner far before the tournament started, and he did me proud. But 2 Avalanche decks in the top 2 was to be expected on my book, and not seeing too many Soiree in the top was also something I expected, mainly because I felt like a lot of the Soiree decks at this point in the meta hadn't really been refined. People were just kind of, I don't know, they're just throwing as many Soiree cards into a deck as possible with as many other random good cards, and kind of made a deck out of it. And some of them did well, but they are a real sort of shadow of the decks that started popping up, a month, 2 months later into the format.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Soiree definitely went through a change. Had a lot more representation over here in North America. So the water list, you brought that up. I'll just kind of touch on that. Obviously, 2 of the big cards that got added were the new Titus as well as Tros the monster. Some people had said, oh, well, hasn't this been around for forever? Yeah, you've had Folka and you've had Yuna. Also, the lightning forward was very nice in case your opponent decided to go wide against you because Titus could only go in 1 at a time. The lightning was a really nice counter to that, and that you could just remove something outright from the game. It was a really cool deck, and I was very excited to see it just because it felt different, whereas a lot of these decks, Soirees, and just sometimes it feels very samey, where it's just I'm just going to slam out a bunch of big bodies and make you deal with it. I really liked the style of the water that, nope, I'm actually going to have very minimal bodies. I'm going to have this guy who can just very slowly go and chip, and then I'll just use like control elements, bounces and such to keep you away from it. I think it got third and fourth place here. I believe it had the same at Florida, and it definitely fell off after that. And I don't know, it was kind of funny because as much as I liked the style of the deck, I was never personally sold on how strong it necessarily was. Not that it couldn't compete, because obviously it could, but I don't know. It felt like it did one thing really well, and so if you were able to kind of mess with that, then that kind of messed with it. So I think Titus and Tros were the two big additions. Obviously, Moshri was still huge. Moshri is banned now, though. Do you see this one staying around ever, or do you think that's kind of the death knell for it, or how do you feel about it?
Well, I kept it going at locals until the FF4 deck came out, because I kind of felt like the ban should be implemented the moment new cards came in to the meta. Mm-hmm. So I took out the Masteries, I put in this new Rydia. I barely changed I was playing with Fire Water, and I barely changed the list I was working with, and it definitely just feels like it loses too much without Mastery. Like, Mastery is the unfair thing it has going for it. Otherwise, you're playing quite a fair deck that is quite reliant on hitting a couple of good EX bursts in a game to really kind of claw an advantage. But I'd still kind of like to see, maybe the new set, once people have had a chance to reset and reevaluate, if maybe replacing Mastery with the new Light or Dark card. I did wonder if like a Titus Kadaj deck in a similar vein could do the same kind of thing, because they're sort of very X-proof kind of cards, very hard to interact with.
Yeah.
So we'll see if anything like that comes to light, and if Titus maintains popularity in the coming months.
How did you feel about Titus as a card in particular? He pretty much lived up to my expectations. He did exactly what I thought he would do, which is that, he's just a body you put out there and you just slowly go in and chip away. And there were a few times I would choose him because, okay, I got to get this guy off the board. He's going to kill me. But man, having the difference between drawing 3 cards and 2 cards is pretty huge. And I even saw a couple players say, I don't know, maybe this guy should be restricted. Like, he feels pretty obnoxious. And there were times that were like that. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to pick this. It just sends him so far ahead. Overall, I really liked him. How did you feel about Titus?
I kind of tried to throw him in every war deck I built from the start of the set, and quickly realized that he wasn't the kind of card you could just throw in. The game has sort of gone past the point where you can just have an unblockable forward doling out a clock, I feel like.
Yeah.
And he isn't completely removed from removal. He's still got Shantoto and Titan and friends that can hit him, Hecaton Share, etc. So he seems like overall pretty fair. It's just in this kind of deck where he works nicely because there aren't that many forwards. So if your opponent wants to board clear, they're only really board clearing the Titus, so that they want to Shantoto a Titus, that's fine. It's better to play him in a deck where he is just the one kind of attacking, and the rest of your resources are focused at removing forwards, controlling the board, so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I really liked the way he worked out in this deck. He felt like he had a home, which it's good when when a legend card like this that seems quite generic at first actually does have a nice kind of place and fits in the meta well.
Yeah, that's fair. So I'm going to an Icewind list here. I'm not 100% sure who piloted this. Let's see if it gives it to me without resetting the whole thing. So this was Icewind by Robert Phillips. Okay. Oh, and there was another one piloted by Chris Cdat. And so some of the new tools Icewind got, we got the Ice Shantoto and Atomos as a monster, as well as Zidane, brand new 2-cost Zidane. Not to mention this particular list ran Chocobo Sam backup, lets you search out Chocolate. There's just some consistency there. And 3 CP Zidane, for anyone knows me, knows how much I hate that card and how much it's tormented me for so long. And I thought, well, nothing will ever replace that card, but this 2 CP seems to have done it, because I have seen way more of the 2 CP Zidane than I have seen the 3 CP one. And at first, when I first saw it at Florida, I didn't get to see it a whole lot at in London, but in Florida, I saw a lot of people make like what I thought were poor decisions with it, where they would run in and get themselves killed. Like, they knew they had a blocker, but they just wanted to mill that card so badly. And it'll probably come as no surprise to you, and we've talked about cards like this before in Lonnie and in Mind Flayer, and that I just hate this type of card because it's so high rolling. I literally played a loop mirror match the other day where my opponent stole my Yunas and my Miras and my Valafor, and I stole a bunch of dead backups from them. And you know, I won a couple of my matches at Omaha because I stole my opponent's best card. He was playing Ice Lightning. He was like, oh, you're White Tiger Lassie Nimbus, or is Ice Earth? I was like, cool, thanks, I'll take that. Oh, you're Gentiana? Thanks, I'll take that. And I'll just always hate these high rolly cards that, hey, randomly, I can just steal something insane from you. And it really baffles me, and I think you've mentioned this before too, at least you did at the start of the Opus. I'll see if your feelings have changed. It baffles me that not only does he do it on entry, he does it on attack, and he has haste. Like, I don't know, it kind of seemed like it should have been one or the other. Like, okay, he gets haste so that way he can attack right away and do it, or he does, I don't know, it just, the card's absolutely crazy. How'd you feel about Zidane?
My feelings towards him kind of like dropped off a while after playing him a little bit, because he did effectively replace a name that is and was already strong in the 3-drop. And yeah, you definitely have those situations where you're trying to high roll with the effect and you just miss a bunch and you lose because of it, like playing Zidane versus Soiree, especially in like a deck like this with Ice Wind. You hit a lot of dead cards, naturally there's betting anything you want to get off them. But I liked it in the sense that it gave Wind a different win condition, especially this kind of deck where it's a lot more again about manipulating the board and trying to just kind of survive, set up a big combo, stick a Bismarck on the board, stuff like that. So Zidane gives you that alternate way of disrupting the opponent's strategy, and it also it does prevent stuff like loops, decks that rely on certain pieces of a combo from just being able to dominate in a matchup like this. Because without the Zidane, you'd play against that kind of matchup, and I don't think you'd really ever win, because there's not enough ways to interact with what your opponent's trying to do when they're just they don't care about doing damage, they just care about getting to a certain point where they have Exodia, as we always say.
Yeah.
So I think it became more of a interesting meta card like Titus did, without feeling too overbearing by the end of it, from my opinion.
Nice. Sounds like very different from where you started on it.
Yeah.
All right. So also in this list, the new Ice Shantoto. I think that kind of did what everyone thought it would. I have to admit, part of me still wonders why this card is as hyped as it is, but I wonder if it's just because it's in ice that, a solid ice recursion and it's an on-curve body. So, and when you can pay it for 1, there's no denying how good that feels. I didn't end up seeing the action ability as much as I thought. I thought maybe people would go really heavy in on that, on the whole dull your whole board with crystal thing, but maybe because it was tied to a crystal, it just wasn't as common.
Yeah, maybe that'll change next. There's a whole lot of crystals coming out, and we've only seen half the cards. So, but yeah, the fact that this card was good without the action ability was nice. Ice had been dying for just a good generic forward for a long time that didn't have to worry so much about the opponent's hand being low. Obviously, if you play it for 1, the card is absolutely insane. But even playing it for 4, in a lot of cases, especially in a deck like this where you're very limited on the amount of recursion you have, it's a fine addition. It really helped the overall consistency.
Moving to the winner of your tournament, it was Lewis, right? Yeah, and I believe he played Sky Pirates, and this one I'm really curious about, and I've brought it up in a few other videos and on posts. So Sky Pirates won this tournament. Obviously yours was 2 decks, so also Avalanche won it. And Sasha Stark played in a tournament too, might have been German Nationals, and he won it with Sky Pirates as well. And it got some new tricks, right? We've got the new Lightning in there. We have the new Leviathan. I didn't see that on stream a whole lot, but I know the potential of that card and what it could do. King Tycoon, Lewis threw in as a backup for him. So it got new tricks, and it won 2 tournaments still. And I was 100% yes, Sky Pirates is still an insane deck. It even got a few new toys in Opus 16, and yet over here it just disappeared, and I'm just baffled by that. Like, this deck is still insanely strong. How did it just vanish into thin air? I don't know. Did it stay more relevant over there? Did it kind of disappear after that tournament? Like, what happened with that?
I mean, I haven't been keeping up as much with the other bigger European events. I think it still did relatively fine. I don't think it won anything else or came close to winning anything else. But it's one of those weird FFTCG only things. Like, the deck is very strong. I mean, I was watching an Octagon match just this week in RVA where the guy just opened a good Sky Pirate start. He just kind of just had it, and he won because the synergy is there and it's strong. His opponent had a kind of very slow start, and Sky Pirate's really good at capitalizing on slow starts.
Yeah.
It did have a lot of issues in testing with Soiree, so that's maybe why it didn't see as much much in North America. Maybe the Sky Pirate players there just weren't comfortable with the amount of Soiree that was going around the re-raises. But I'm not sure. I haven't picked up the deck a single time this set, to be fair. Not that I haven't thought it was good. I barely played, but even then, I got enough out of the deck last set,
Yeah.
and it didn't really change that much mechanically. So I was just kind of happy to leave it as it is and work on new things. But I still really like the way it works, the way it operates.
I wondered if that was it too. It's just, that's just old hat. That was last Opus. So, on to the new stuff. I think those are all the comments I had for the London one. Was there anything else you wanted to mention? Any cards that stood out to you?
Any cards that stood out? Not particularly. I don't know if there's anything really new in the Avalanche decks. I don't think.
I know over here some of them ran actually a couple of the Soiree backups just for consistency. I don't know if anyone over there did it. Some people would run like Amber to get Elvis just so they had Fire and Earth.
Yeah, the friends of mine who have played that deck in North America know my feelings on it, and no, I don't appreciate it very much. But yeah, I can see Lewis is building on a single Opus 16 card, but not the deck needed it.
Yeah,
it was already very strong. But yeah, given that Mastery surged in popularity after that, again, I'm not really surprised it did fall off, because people kept telling me Mastery really does hurt this deck a lot. You get it set up early, bounce the Barret, and they really don't get a whole lot of time to get going. But now that Mastery's gone, I'd be surprised to not see it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Especially when the new set comes out, because the new set doesn't look like it's going to change that much in terms of which archetypes might be still good.
Absolutely.
From this set.
All right, so we'll hop on a plane and go back onto this side of the sea. We will go to Florida, Haven Games. So this one was kind of all... there was a ton of Soirees. I'm looking at the top 16. I definitely see several Soirees in here. The winner was just an Ice Fire aggro deck, and he just really went in with that new Moro. Let's see as well. Some Soirees. There was a water list. Sam Toole did a fun, kind of Fusoya list as well, really taking advantage of that Fusoya. There were still some twins. There was a Versdale. This one, ours was definitely a little more all over the place, but there were a lot of Soirees. You could immediately see their power. Could see a couple of the Avalanches. And this one I cast, although I was sick with COVID at the time, so I don't 100% remember it really well. I'm going to look at the Fire Ice list. Lastwell was my spoiler, so I'm just super attached to that card, but also it just ended up being really good. Turn 2, it was the last thing a control player wanted to see. Turn 1, I open my Northstal and pass, and I go, cool, Lastwell, immediately freeze that, and now I'm threatening to hit your hand every turn. It's I don't want to see that. And then what else new got? The Soul ended up being pretty neat, at least in this little list. And the Morrow, I kind of overlooked the Morrow, but they've put a couple now cards in Fire to let them draw. And I was playing with Mono Lightning the other day with some of the new Lightning cards, and they've got the breaks, they've got the dulls. I think Lightning is really just missing card advantage at this point, because I felt like I just couldn't keep a healthy hand, and it seems like they have pushed Fire. We saw some new cards that got revealed too for Fire that they seem to be kind of pushing Fire towards this. Okay, there are ways to let's get more cards into our deck. So anything stand out to you about any of the Fire Ice stuff?
No, I was surprised that it managed to do so well. The list just seemed like a deck full of just good cards, which you never really expect to perform so well these days. But I kind of think maybe it just hit a little niche with this event. We've barely seen anything of it after the event. But if you then look at the recent re-raise from Omaha, you've got Sam Prime and Zaim with the Ice Earth deck kind of coming out of nowhere as well. That maybe it's just a case of with these North American events, you just build something that can crush Soiree, and then also just has a solid base to beat other things. If you just play well, and maybe that's what happened with this Fire Ice deck as well. They just happened to be solid versus the Soiree decks at the time, and was solid versus everything else that was being played as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You mentioned soirees, and because we're on the American side now, might as well bring it up now. This was, at least over here, this was the deck to beat. This was what most people played in Omaha. It was one of the reasons Sam and Zaim did so well, is because they had a deck specifically meant to counter soirees. So they get to top 8, and it's nothing but soirees. I go, oh, okay, perfect for us. And I mean, surely everyone knows how good the deck is and why it's so good. It just kind of does everything. It has because it plays every element. It has the strongest effect of every element. Straight break and haste with Merald. I mean, lightning would kill for a card like that just broke a forward and then could immediately attack. Vesvia can draw 2, and they're 2 separate auto abilities, so even if you Amaterasu, you can cancel 1. Edel just providing protection from everything, which was just so weird. Like, I could understand if, like, oh, they can't take damage, or oh, they can't be broken outright. Like, she does both. They can't be affected by anything, and it made, kind of similar to Sky Pirates, where board wipes were only so effective against them because kites will just hit the Von and then they kind of reload. It's like, well, you can't even just drop Sasano. You have to take out the Edel first, or you can't just drop Titan. You got to take out the Edel first. So Shantoto, our Lord and Savior, will always just continue to be the card that has to keep dealing with all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, Irwin has the Zidane effect, can pull the best card out of your hand. Elvis. And then they had so many EX bursts, too, I think is what made it so brutal. Is like, nothing felt worse than swinging. You hit an Elvis, and they go, cool, blast that thing for 15,000. It's like, oh, my God. So they were a terror over here. Did they become more popular over there as the Opus went on, or did Europe always just kind of go, I don't know, we're not as into it?
I mean, it's an archetype full of, what people could call waifus, right? Mm-hmm. So, I've got plenty of guys in my locals that appreciate a good waifu. So it was popular in lots of different veins. I mean, I think the thing is, a lot of the builds were secondhand from Japan again. This was a set where, I guess, I almost want to say the West was a bit rusty when it came to competitive events, while Japan still had them going on in some capacity, mostly throughout COVID. That a lot of people just sort of copied the good stuff they saw that was winning over there, and that became these EX heavy ones with a mastery slotted in, more of an Axstar focus, and that did pick up in popularity. I think it even then went and won the Dallas ReRaise and Okimoto-san. So I mean, I appreciated that, like, from the lists I'd seen at the ReRaise at the Brotherhood, how much they had improved and become more kind of succinct with how they ended up in these later re-raises.
The EX Burst version in particular, and I'll kind of move to the Dallas one here. Man, it was brutal. It was a brutal, unfun thing to play against. I tested with this list a lot, and I would test it against my friend. He was trying to figure out how, ways to. And I would have bad starts. I would completely brick on colors, and there were turns where I would just have to discard immediately or just play out some forward that did absolutely nothing. And I would still come back to win those games because they have to hit me eventually. And the moment they do, EX Burst Thoradin, go get whatever I need. Don't mind if I do. EX Burst Amber, go get Shinju. Now I'm fit. It was just brutal. It's the reason I took the loop list to Omaha, because I was like, I don't want to attack. Forget that. I'm not attacking and getting myself killed. I'll just mill you to death. Brutal list. It uses the Luca backup too, so they get the anthem. So now a lot of it can't even die to Amaterasu. You've got the Fusoya and Mashri. It was just the icing on the cake of like, all those EX Burst summons, just in case I throw them away, I'll just do whatever I want. Like, it felt pretty unbeatable seeing it. Like, I only saw it lose if it just had a bad time. Very, very scary deck and very unfun to play against. And to comment on that before you say, Soirees kind of reminded me of Sophie from Opus 13 in that we saw her in a lot of different builds. She started, some people would play like an ice variant with Celestia and White Tiger, and then some people would move Sophie towards the Doga, and then all this other stuff. So go ahead.
I can kind of see what you mean with that. Like the Sophie deck was the best. Although you got banned, it was just a deck that just played a million EX bursts with a bunch of these good cards. I guess the same vibe went along here. I think the same vibe will continue forever at this point. I think it's something you just can't stamp out. If you're actively going to make cards that can, just actively make archetypes that can just throw in loads of EX bursts and still function, that's what people are going to do, because it is it's very free, like yeah, sometimes you'll be let down, sometimes you will hit the like 2 cards you're playing that aren't EX bursts and you'll feel bad, but most of the other games you're going to hit those bursts, and as we well know, one well-timed amber into a Madame Adele can completely change the course of a game. So across best of one 7-8 round tournament, that's going to be where a lot of people want to be before they get into Top Cut.
Absolutely. Sam Toole played an interesting Fire Windless using Braska. Technically, he was the Guardian starter, but he's an Opus 16 card. This list could grand summon with things like the new Vaughn backup, which with Philo just let him tap for all the colors you needed, which was cool. And I'll kind of take this moment too, since he had both Jin and Atomos in his deck, to talk about this wave of 2 CP monsters, because monsters have been something they've been working on, and for the most part, monsters always felt very weak because they would always come out with this like set of monsters, and they would all do the same thing except for their element. Oh, I get counters, but then I deal damage because I'm fire. I get counters, and then I break something because I'm skeleton. I'm lightning. They really seem to hit the mark with these. I call them the Amano monsters, even though not all of them have the Amano art, but. So they can become a forward for free, which is perfect. And I think that ended up being so relevant that because you got to choose when to make them a forward and it didn't cost you anything, they could dodge EX bursts because you just waited to the last possible attacker to turn it into a forward. They could dodge relevant removal. And some of them just had crazy effects. Unfortunately, things like Spectral Keeper just dull, and Hades was like really particular, but like Biblos, discard and a dull freeze, Atomos, cast 2, get 2 backups back, and get all of your backups when he swings. Jin ended up being surprisingly relevant in fire, just that little extra bump and the first strike. Tros obviously was great. So what do you think of all these monsters? Do you think they really hit the mark on them and like this is what they need to be, or do you wonder if maybe this was too much? How do you feel about them?
They're really interesting cards. Like monsters in general have a lot of interesting like workspace, I guess, because there's been printed a lot of strong ways to break them sort of inconsequentially, like they just happen to be there. Stuff like Lock, just being able to break monsters that you can't really play. Stuff like Atomos for a great deal of value versus Ice Wind. Robel was quite popular last set and it fell off this set, but Robel can break monsters as well, and I'm sure Robel on Atomos is something a player wants to be doing. We had Fenrir before that could break monsters and bring back 2 drops, but then Sophie got put to 1. There's just not been a point where it's felt good for people, but I have been seeing it a little bit more recently. I don't know. I think the answers exist to these cards. They're never going to be that unfair, but it definitely feels very tricky when you build like a little early lead, put a couple of damage in, you have a strong board, and then they play this Atomos down. You're like, well, unless I'm putting them from like 2 to 7, they can just do this suddenly mad turn where it completely cripples my board, potentially cripples my hand. I mean, I don't know how it works with this Fire Wind deck. With the Ice Wind deck in particular, you end up getting a free Bismarck out of an Atomos swing by the time it gets to attack, so you just got to make sure it never gets to, which is a lot easier said than done, given that people weren't really teching or playing cards that dealt with monsters in general.
Yeah. Adam, I know Steve Dolman from YYT was saying with Atomos, he had some people efficiently play Lock against him on turn 2 because they would play Atomos first, play like a Uke backup. Oh, it was a second cast, so it reactivates. Now I have both backups. I can immediately play the next backup, but whatever it was Pavlov reactivate. Here comes Lock for 2, and he's just like, what? It's turn 2, and you've like efficiently locked me already? Like, good gravy. Yeah, they were a beast to behold. Let's see what else we have here from Florida. We did see a little Sky Pirates, a hint of Earth Ice coming out of there, little Wind Earth as well. That one is very control heavy. And yeah, I think that's about it for Florida, or for Dallas. So let's move on to Omaha, which I was at personally. So I've got the scoop on all the recaps. So obviously, Ice Earth really made me happy to see this deck succeed. It's got Were I in it. That's a card I was celebrating, in Opus 15. Maybe I was the only person who was playing it. We did mention it in our Opus 15 recap, but showed up here. And really, obviously, the star of this is Arcanist, especially against Soirees, when there's so many decks that only have 1 cost to forward. To have this backup that says, that's great, you're never going to attack me. I'm just going to sit here forever. Because beyond that, there's not a whole, like the new Lightning, which is kind of, I mean, I don't know if you'd consider that an Opus 16 or not, because it's a special promo card. Mira was obviously in there. Mira bringing back Luminous Puma, especially for free, just feels gross. So if you ever get them to 5 damage and Mira's bringing in that for free, she's a fantastic card. Beyond that, Unileska actually ended up being pretty effective in here. As Sam said, Scale Toad basically hits their hand, gets them down low, then Unileska rips that last card out, and it's really effective too with Biblos. So at the end of their turn, if they have to discard for the Scale Toad, now Biblos gets a Dull Freeze, then Unileska can rip a card out, now Biblos gets another Dull Freeze. So really well positioned to beat up Soirees. How well does it do against other stuff? That I'm not sure, because I don't know how much other stuff it fought, but your thoughts?
So I was keen to play some games the other week, and I thought we were talking about this, group of mine were talking about this, and I was listening to what people were saying about it, and I thought, well, yeah, I mean, it seems like an interesting meta call. Let's just see if it kind of lives up against other decks, and I ended up playing it straight away against Earth Wind because someone said, nah, Earth Wind will just smash it. And that turned out to be more or less true. It was an Earth Wind Storm deck with lock, like very similar to the original builds from Opus 12 with some new bits in there, obviously. But yeah, it's like I was saying with the Fire Ice, how this Ice Earth is a great deck for a meta call for an event where you're expecting everyone to try hard and bring Soiree and stuff like that. But on a kind of casual field where you're going to be playing stuff that's more particular, more innovative, like Earth Wind, like this deck completely crumbles before it because it's got all these monsters it's reliant on. Lock destroys those monsters. Arcanist is only good if they're actually playing decks like Avalanche and Soiree that have all their forwards basically the same or very similar cost. So it was fascinating to see because this deck, given that it came first and second, was the absolute perfect call for the event. And that's actually really nice to see when someone makes a call like that, two people make a call like that, and they both do so well. It's like this is more of what we want to see in FF that we haven't actually been able to see outside of that many events since the game's inception, where someone just comes in with something completely out of left field and just absolutely dominates. But yeah, I mean, would you bring it to another event? Would you bring it to the next event? Maybe, but you know, it's not a deck I'd sort of go to locals with, where I'm going to be playing it's a different deck every single round, and I'll encounter things that just make my deck fall apart. So yeah, it was fascinating to see it in action and think about it.
Well said. And so those were kind of the big stuff from the events. I want to touch on some more cards from the Opus that maybe didn't have a showing. This deck did show up at Florida. I know I saw it on stream. I don't know if it topped anywhere, but it's kind of this mono-win Fat Chocobo deck where you slam the Fat Chocobo turn one, immediately just start drawing cards, and then you can start putting down backups. And I remember I'd kind of overlooked this card when it got spoiled in the set reviews, but seeing it in action, it could do some pretty gross things. You know, you've got Bismarck out there, the Holy Whale, drops the whole board, ping, 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 ping. Fatty dulls himself, puts down Riku, which reactivates the board, and Bismarck bing, 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 just machine guns them all down again. It's like, oh my goodness, this is kind of disgusting. And even things like Sin, I played against Eureka. I was playing Sky Pirates, and he drops his Sin on me, and I'm like, wait, I can't use kites? I can't use Balthier? What? No, that's not how this is supposed to work. I do with the Sky Pirate thing, and you sit there and take it, sir. And then, you know, the Sin can auto ability cancel too, so like that wind stuff. Cecil maybe didn't get as much of a showing as I'd kind of hoped he would show up, but that wind list with the Chocobo, with things like Madam M for consistency, with Chocobo Sam, seemed to have some pretty solid times. The only thing was the Fina. I don't know how much I ever really saw the Fina. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it seemed like a cool deck. Another deck when it did well. I think it was at is it Belgian Nationals or something? Netherlands Nationals, one of the European.
Oh yeah, that's
ones.
right.
And I gave it a go, and it was kind of cool. It was fun. I think Mono Wind is always a fun deck to play. It just has that habit of falling short in a lot of cases, and these days it's very reliant on Bismarck to really kind of lock the game up. But yeah, that Fatty was a really good addition for Mono Wind, and I'd like to see more cards like that for mono decks in general, because it really kind of one card saved that mono deck and made it look good. So yeah, it was a cool deck. used the mechanics of wind really well. But yeah, I think it's cool. We could definitely see it pop up again in the future.
One thing they did do well in this set overall that I liked, and my friend Daniel has mentioned this, so I'll credit him, is that they put a lot of characters. Sometimes often FF has an issue where they will release the same characters over and over and over again. The Y'shtola is a perfect example. Hey, it's another Scion Y'shtola. It's like, cool, we already have a bunch of good Y'shtolas. But they did do a good job this set of putting known characters in different elements, so putting Shantoto into ice, putting Noctis into just lightning, putting lightning, into light. Now, like, they did a good job of mixing them up. So it's like, oh, it's that character, but I get to use their other effect. And I mentioned Noctis because I know you were really high on the Kingsglaives. I remember reading your post where you're like, bruv, I'm telling you, this is the thing to do right here. You've had a whole opus with it now. How do you view Noctis and the Glaives? I know it showed up at a few little tournaments, but I don't recall if it made any top cuts.
Yeah, I mean, I know a couple of them made top 16 at the UK ReRaise. I can't remember if any actually made it to the top 8. It was a really fun deck. I still think it was pretty solid. It's just one of those things where it was a victim for me of being the first deck I really put time into. So I've been playing it for like a solid month. Played it for a couple of regionals and a lot of locals, and I still have it just sleeved up. It's one of those decks that I just I bring to locals. Like, I don't know what I'm going to play today, maybe I'll play Kingsglaive. It's just solid, good fun. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it will get any better, get any worse in the next set, but I'm happy with how it ended up. I just think it's one of those ones where there's a lot of decks to choose from right now, and it's just one of the ones that didn't see a lot of action. Maybe just because no one decided to really bring it to an event and do well, or if it just wasn't good enough in general. I'm not sure, but I still think it's pretty good.
Fair enough. I want to ask about Black Mages, because this was probably the one thing I was the most excited about before it started. I built some decks around it. They felt somewhat similar to Soirees or Sophie in that they felt versatile. Like, I didn't feel you could do fire. You could do fire lightning. I never really saw anyone try like ice lightning with them, but you could do the earth variant too and get Robel, because he's technically a black mage as well. So I felt like, there was that loop water list with the white mages where you could just draw through your entire deck in Alua. And at first I got a little scared. I was like, oh no, is this going to be the thing to beat? And then over here, at least, they didn't show up at all. And I would think Soirees is the most obvious answer to that, because Black Waltz 3 cannot target any of the Soirees. They're all too high of a cost for him. Maybe there's something else to them. I enjoyed playing them. Like, they felt like a cool little package, but they just didn't make a splash at all. How did you see Black Mages?
Yeah, I tried it myself, saw it used a lot. I mean, Fire Lightning was the main source of practice I had versus it. And it just didn't solve any of the problems any of the element combinations it got put in had to begin with. It is just, it is removal that only hits a certain cost. The cost it's hitting isn't really that important to hit. It's more important these days to hit these big boss monsters that keep cropping up. So you need consistent and efficient answers to the big cards, which a lot of the time the deck just couldn't provide. I mean, yeah, it was cool when you popped off and they had a board of like 2-3 drops and a 4 drop that had 8k, and you would go discard two waltzes with Black Waltz 3, pop the 2 3s and kill the 4. But that was like a once in a blue moon scenario that your opponent really had to kind of play into, and most people would kind of figure that out after the first few games playing against it. So it just became too predictable, too easy to beat. And I think it would just, I don't think it's going to go anywhere either. You got stuff like the new X-Death coming out next set, which removes the break zones. So stuff like that, which is very reliant on this break zone, will probably just kind of fall off even harder.
You must be ecstatic to be able to return everyone to the void this next set.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see how well he does.
Well, it might, that's kind of sad to think if, this was its heyday and it really didn't get much of a heyday, but you might be right. One deck, though, that it was actually pretty good against because all the forwards were relatively low cost was Guardians. And Guardians was really interesting, especially over here. They were delayed. So by the time they came out, it was almost Opus 16 already. So they didn't really get that like 0.5 Opus time that sometimes some of the starter decks get. However, I've seen some lists from Japan and like watching some of these RVA weeklies. I know like Jeff Lossley's running it constantly, and it's pretty strong, like way stronger than I even originally thought it would be. When you have this explosion turn where Waka, all right, Yuna into Orin, Titus is completely free, go search out Jekt or the next Waka, and especially with Jekt block, just this, hey, I've got this massive board and I'll kill anything you do, and the Waka special being able to just like, when I first read all the cards, I was just kind of, they just kind of seem okay, and 10 is my favorite game, but then when I play with them, I was like, oh my, wow, there's some real power here. Like, it kind of just it blows up out of nowhere. And again, seeing some of these Japanese lists have really gotten the consistency down, and you add in things like Leviathan and just all these little tricks that I hadn't even considered. I'm just like, this deck's pretty brutal. Like, man, I almost wish I'd taken it to Omaha because it's just such a fun list. So how did the Guardians stack up for you?
Apart from me playing a bit of the Ice Earth deck, it's the only deck I've actually been playing recently.
All right.
It's just one of those ones where I just sometimes feel like playing a game. It's just a really fun deck to play. It's definitely, I'd call it a perfectly balanced starter deck, especially when compared to the ones before and after, with the Avalanche deck being, in my opinion, way too good, and the FF4 deck being bad. It fits that kind of perfect balance of it's a good way to make that kind of archetype finally feel like it's got a home somewhere, because they tried it before and it fell very flat. And it just does very cool things. It was nice. I was playing against Wind Earth as well, and I would make a board of like Waka, Orin, Yuna, something like that, and then they'd break it, and I just make the exact same board on the next turn, because Yuna's just so efficient and the cards are quite cheap, and you always kind of get to play with a decent hand size. And if you're under pressure, Waka can alleviate a lot of that pressure if they play early forwards and don't have any backups, so he breaks their forwards and they don't have a lot of resources to play more down. It just felt very versatile. It's definitely not like tier 1, but it's a very fun deck to play, and it can kind of take games off anyone.
Yeah, that's quite good. The Titus being free in particular, and getting to do tricks like using Jekt's entry effect to bounce your own Titus to immediately replay it for free, to not only get a Waka counter to then go search the Jekt block or the extra Waka or whatever you want with it. It was a cool package, and again, I love 10, so it was nice to get those finally. Okay, so now I have to ask you about a mechanic, and that's crystals, because this is the second opus we've had with the crystal mechanic. It's a mechanic I don't like, and I think personally, I feel it's very half-baked, and I think you saw that in the tournament results. How many of these decks actually used crystals? Soirees didn't care about them, and technically it was in the Ice Earth list at Omaha, but I don't recall them like, oh, they really were using crystals a lot. It's an interesting idea, this CP that you generate off to the side, nobody can touch, but it's definitely inconsistent in that, at least for me personally, when I play it, I either see all the generators of the crystals and I don't see any of the cards that spend them, or the exact opposite. I'll see the Robel Lackbell, I'll see this, whatever card, but I don't actually have the backups to generate the crystals. So so far for me, it's felt very inconsistent, and when you have a world where there is consistency, why would you ever do that over it? Now 17, they're pushing it a lot with things like Glaciella and this FF Brave Exvius package. Will that be enough to change it around? I don't know, but that's just my feelings about it. How do you feel about crystals? Have they changed for you? Like, did they affect your competitive scene at all? Give me the crystal lowdown, Mr. Cool.
Yeah, it's definitely, I definitely agree with you. It's definitely still in the oven, so to speak. And I think this set, either will or it won't. I'm not going to just be, it's either Big Crystal support is going to completely revolutionize the way we play, or it's going to kind of fall flat again. There's so much of it in this set that we've already seen that I'm inclined to believe that it will make an impact. There's finally a really strong crystal utilizer in Glaciella. There's better crystal generators. The biggest problem really is that, like we were talking about Shantoto earlier, and how you don't see the action ability much. The reason you don't see the action ability much is because there's no good ways to generate crystals. Even in your Ice Wind deck, it's fine to slot in a couple of the 2-drop backups to generate them, but those backups kind of suck in a combo deck, which is what Ice Wind's meant to be. But I've played in the past with Lady Lilith, with Lena, playing Water Lining and stuff like that. And Lena especially is like, the more cards I see like Glaciella that generate a crystal on entry and effectively refund Lena, there's some really kind of cracked things you can do with those kind of cards that I'm really looking forward to experimenting with again. And I do have a certain amount of confidence in this coming set that we will be able to see something top tier that utilizes crystals more efficiently than just playing Robolac Bell and a few backups, which is how it's going at the moment.
Well, and I like assuming FF Dex is accurate. I just searched for all Opus 16 cards with crystals a keyword. Did you know there's only 11 cards? There are only 11 cards that use crystal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them were in ice, 3 were in fire, 1 in wind, 1 in water. So lightning and earth didn't even get any, and that's just. I don't know, that's just so weird to me that they would make this. This is the new thing. Not all the elements even get it. There's only 11 cards out of 130. Like, that's just so strange. And I guess because to me, the last thing mechanically that like really changed how the game was played was multi-element cards. That these you can now discard them for 2 types of CP. Wow, haven't been able to do that before. You got to pay them in a certain way, and they had these like dual element payoffs. So I've got an effect from this one, I've got an effect from this one, and the crystals have kind of just felt like, hey, remember when stuff would enter the field and you do something? Well, now when you enter the field, you can pay something to do that something. Pretty crazy. So I don't know. I hope you're right. I hope in Opus 17, this is their make or break, I think. So I hope they show up because, yeah, seeing that there was only 11 cards in the last set is a bit disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I touched on is the kind of thing of you got to play a devil's advocate a bit and assume to some extent it is a lot more difficult to introduce a whole new resource than it is to introduce stuff like multi-elements. And even there, you could argue there have been a fair amount of mistakes with multi-elements that had to be rectified in cases of stuff like Sophie. But yeah, like if you make it too easy, if you make it too good, then it just kind of warps the game like forever. It's hard to go back on. Like the thing is, you introduce these gimmicks, they tend to do them over a block of like 3 sets. But if you make the gimmick too good, it just kind of keeps snowballing into the rest of the sets, and the new gimmicks you introduce after that aren't as effective and don't look as good, which is how crystals are looking right now compared to multi-elements. But they have this one last set to make a big difference, and yeah, hopefully they do match up.
That's a fair point. I respect that, you know, and I think that is true as well, is that if I had my druthers and I have to pick either they went so ham on it that they just become overbearing and overpowered versus they wanted to ease in because they'd rather them be a little too weak than to just take over the game, then yeah, I suppose I'd rather have the latter as well. Alex, that was everything I could think of off the top of my head. Were there any other cards you wanted to specifically mention or anything about events, decks, anything like that? Or should we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, there's something I really want to say apart from, you know, this upcoming set. I think we'll see, you know, there aren't that many events scheduled for the rest, but I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some national announcements and stuff on the horizon. But I do think this next set will kind of make or break this trilogy of crystal cards, as we've already spoken. And hopefully, it will just see a lot more innovation from the West this time around. Like I said, I think there was a lot of copycatting Japan this time around. I don't think there was a great deal of innovation, which is fair enough because there still aren't that many events to care about. I think as dates are set and flights are booked for stuff in the future, people will start taking things a lot more seriously, and we should see a lot more differences and a lot more action and a lot more cool stuff cropping up. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that would be quite nice as well. I wonder too, I hadn't really considered that until you said it, but that, you know, Japan has been holding events this entire time through COVID, so they kind of have that competitive practice, whereas we haven't really had anything to play for, so maybe we were really rusty because of that. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious to see how. I'm curious. I want a quick meta prediction from you, because since Opus 11, a new big deck comes out and it immediately falls off. And I've said this before. Martritz was huge in 11, completely disappears. You know, Storm, Samurais are huge, they disappear. Here comes Sophie, and then she gets nerfed, Doga gets kicked out. Here comes Sky Pirates, Avalanche Twins, they seem to somewhat disappear. Do you think Soirees will fall off, or do you think it still remains relevant in the next set? Obviously, I know we haven't seen the whole set yet, but just a hot take prediction.
I think the Ice Earth list from Omaha is proof enough that the deck is counterable if it's prominent enough someone to sit down and build a deck that counters it. that to me is already kind of a worrying sign for the deck's future.
Mm.
I think it's just it always has been very linear, and I'm not a big fan of linear decks. I mean, I'm a lot more fan of decks that require small combos and things like that. So stuff like Ice Wind has in some capacity been around ever since Lock came around. Uh, will Soiree continue to do that, being a gimmick, being an archetype? Probably not. They just keep reintroducing or introducing new archetypes, and they tend to take over. While these ones that are less focused on archetypes, rather than just rather they're just synergy between two elements, they tend to be the ones that stick around. So I think Soiree is just in a natural danger of repeating history, as you've said.
Interesting. We'll see if that'll be so crazy if they were so prominent and they just disappear. You mentioned Lock, and since I've got you here and I want to pick your brain about your juicy card information, what is it about a card like Lock that has allowed it to be so relevant? Is it the fact that it can be so cheap? Is it that it just has universally great effects that just aren't really going to go bad? Like, what is it about a card like Lock that's allowed it to be such a mainstay?
I mean, I could answer that question in a lot of ways. I mean, you touched on it already. That it can be very cheap and its effects are very good. I mean, the strength of a boss monster, which is what Lock is dependent on completely on its support network. Lock has a very good backup searcher supporting him in Norse Talon. He's got more that have come out now, like Chocobo Sam and stuff like that. He's got Althea, which is just like the perfect pairing for him. Just the element supports him very well, and the combination he's in is good enough to support itself nowadays, even without Lock. Like some games you don't want Lock, you don't really want to bother playing with him, but you'd obviously play him because he's just that good. So it's the same with that and cards like Sophie. If Sophie wasn't the difference in this game, Mashri being banned is one thing, but if Sophie was at 3, we'd be playing a completely different game of cards right now. If you did the same thing to Lock, it wouldn't have that much of an impact because obviously no one's cared enough about Lock to think he needs limiting. Not that I think he does at all. But yeah, if you limited Lock, you'd see a whole lot of less Ice Wind. Just as limiting Sophie, you see a whole lot less Monks and Water Earth. It really depends what they do on the side of limitations and bans and how they introduce new cards and archetypes into the meta.
Great insight. I appreciate that. Folks, I want to thank Mr. Hancox, Mr. Cool himself, for coming on and helping me kind of recap Opus 16, Emissaries of Light. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. What cards really stood out to you? Which ones, kind of fell short? I did a halfway through Opus meta review on basically all the cards. If you want to see any cards I didn't talk about, I still pretty much feel the same about as I did here. But fun Opus. I did enjoy it. Definitely there were times that like Soiree is what felt very oppressive at times, and maybe not even oppressive, but you just get tired of seeing the same thing. I think everyone does, whether it's good or bad. Everyone just gets tired of seeing the same thing and over again. Sounds like maybe it was a little better over there for you, but I know over here it's like, oh god, another Soiree. So that was it. We'll see what Opus 17 is like. Alex, anyone you want to give a shout out to or say anything before we sign off?
No.
Fair enough.
There's too many people to name. Everyone's great, especially you, Travis.
Aw, thank you, sir.
Always working hard putting out this content.
I'm happy to do it. Let's hope that X-Death looks as good as it is. Alex has his blog. You can check out his Discord as well. Hopefully he'll do a set review for us. Would be looking forward to that if he does. But either way, thanks for being on. Enjoy Opus 17 when it comes out. And as always, I'll see you next time. Take care.
Hey, cool guys.